Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. I'm John Bedker, the host of the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. We have recently rebranded. The rebranding is now done. I'm particularly pleased about it. I encourage everyone to go to drjohnbedkerleadership.com for the new website, linkage to all of the previous episodes, lots of other things on the site. I encourage everyone to go there, sign up, and of course, subscribe. Today, we're going to talk about voting and the role of leadership plays in voting. In particular, I've called this episode, Get Out the Vote. GOTV, Get Out the Vote. It is an important episode, I believe, after the rebranding, and it's important for a number of reasons. I'll touch on several of them here in just a moment, but we're just 1 week away from the midterm elections in the United States. An important time and a very important vote. Voting in the United States is a right. It is also, though, a responsibility. And I'm going to add, it is an act of leadership. Yes, it is. It is your opportunity to lead and to be a leader. Why? Because every vote counts. That's right. Every single vote counts. Your vote counts just as much as every other vote. Whoever casts that other vote, your vote is just as important. You are a leader in voting. So, we have to choose a side. We have to pick a candidate or an issue we either are like, we're for, or we dislike, or we're against. Is either side perfect? Absolutely not. Let's be crystal clear about that. Every single one of us does, in fact, have imperfections. But the reason why we need to get out the vote in this election is particularly pronounced. It allows you an opportunity in part of your leadership journey to get in touch with your values, with your principles, your beliefs. I've spoken about this in previous podcast episodes where I talk about reflective practice. Well, this is a good time for that, to reflect, and then go and vote, to practice on that reflection. Which candidate or which side of an issue is most aligned with your beliefs, with your values, with your principles? Again, it may not be 100%, it may not be all, it may not be every, but which is most aligned? Leaders are often confronted with this choice, this decision and judgment to make. It may not be perfect, but it may be the better of the other alternatives. And that's often what we do in voting. We might be for 2 or 3 issues and against another one. But the other candidate, we might be against 2 or 3 of their issues and for one of them. Well, we need to decide that one that is most aligned with us, with our beliefs, with our values, with our principles. This is what leaders do. When you vote, you're exercising your civic responsibility. And my argument here today is you're exercising your capacity to lead, your leadership, as well as fulfilling your responsibilities as a citizen. Well, what happens oftentimes in the United States where, in fact, if you're of age, 18 or older, and eligible, meeting the requirements of your particular state, you have the right to vote. And as I said in the beginning, you have, I believe, a responsibility because it is an act of leadership and we should all lead. But what often happens, particularly in an election such as is occurring in the next week, midterms, as they're called, is apathy. Apathy is an easy out. That's not a path for leaders. Apathy is just an easy out. You'll hear people say, and they'll make the point, I don't care. It just doesn't matter if I vote. I'm too busy. They're making excuses. They're deciding ultimately on skipping the election. Their vote is one of apathy. I don't care. It doesn't matter. And a long litany of reasons why. Well, what happens when a person chooses apathy over participation? And what, again, I would say leadership. Well, what happens is this. Others vote. Their voice is then heard. And yours, if you choose not to vote, is not. Now, there is a saying that politicians understand really two things. Hopefully a lot more, but certainly two things primarily. Politicians understand money, and politicians understand votes. Money's an unfortunate reality because money does in fact talk, it speaks. But so do your votes. Politicians have to listen to the votes because they get elected by the people that do vote. Votes count. This is a key issue in this election. Let me take a moment to talk about that for just a little bit. Voter suppression is real. Many states in the United States have enacted laws, practices, requirements to suppress people's right to vote. We must fight that. Leaders must fight that. Again, this act of voting is an act of leadership. Each of us must lead. We're living in this age where misinformation, disinformation, and yes, lying, strong word, but unfortunately true, lying, are advanced regularly in our media, all different kinds of media. We need to be mindful of that. We sadly live in what is accurately described as a post-fact world, which makes voting even more important. We need to get there to confront misinformation, disinformation, and lying. Voting in free and fair elections, where people are able to cast their vote for truth, is the very core of democracy. Your vote is therefore very, very important. Our democracy depends on it. And at the moment, with the efforts of this minority but very vocal group to suppress the vote, to misinform the vote, to disinform the vote, to lie about various candidates, puts that sacredness in peril. It puts our democracy in peril. And again, those of you that are regular listeners have heard me talk about Is Democracy in Peril previously, an interview with the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard. I think it's interesting to compare and contrast the interview with Professor Gay and what's going on today. Our democracy, sadly, is now in peril. In our post-fact world, we must vote. Certainly we need to, certainly we should, but in this post-fact world, we must vote. Why? Because this voting is a very real safeguard against the move toward authoritarianism and autocracy. These are the counterparts of democracy, the counterparts of free and fair elections. Those that would cast doubt on our elections by inventing lies about advancing this misinformation and disinformation, about fraud and any number of conspiracy theories to advance their agenda of deconstructing our state, of destroying our democracy. Your vote is about being a leader, doing the right thing. Doing the right thing is the very central and fundamental core of leadership. So when you are called to vote, you are called to do the right thing. Voting is not for electing those that would deny the outcome of an election, deny the fairness of an election, deny the count of an election. But voting is for those that support truth, support free and fair elections. Those that support all eligible voters to vote. And again, there are certain criteria to be met, age requirements, certain legal status. Some states have limitations on, for instance, those that have committed a felony. Now, these are states' laws that must be followed. But there is a huge population of those that take that path of apathy, that choose, for whatever reason, not to participate and not to vote. We need you, Americans, to recognize the importance, the responsibility, the act of leadership that voting in this election and all elections plays. So all eligible voters really need to find that time, that moment, to vote. Not suppress the vote. To be truthful and honest. Not to misinform, disinform, certainly not to lie. Okay? And certainly not to suppress. These principles and these values are at the core of our democracy. Those principles and values of truthfulness, of participation in a democracy. Not authoritarianism, not autocracy, not deconstructing the state, not misinformation and disinformation, certainly not lying. No, 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 none of these. American principles, American values, American leadership is about each of us participating in a democracy. And part of that participation involves us to step forward, to take that time, and to vote. This podcast is a call for each and every one of us to do the right thing. This is the call of leadership. This is the call for each of us to vote. Now, there's lots of ways to get about doing that. So many ways to vote. Many states and localities have different rules, different regulations, different timings. You should become aware of these. Many states allow people to vote early, to vote by mail, to vote by dropping off a printed ballot at a drop-off box. You could certainly vote on an election day in person. There are many ways to do your vote. Learn, understand, and choose the best available option for you to vote. But in the end, that critical component is vote. It is not only your right, it is your responsibility, and it is truly an act of leadership. As I have said, I do believe from a leadership perspective, which is my life's work and passion, that our democracy needs each and every one of us to lead, to stand up. As I said in the beginning, GOTV, get out the vote. We need to participate. We need to lead. We need to bring our vote to this election. No one is perfect. It is not a litmus test for purity. It is to express our beliefs, our values, and our principles as best we can. Now, some people might have a particular issue, a single issue. I'm certainly advancing that model myself to say that democracy is at stake here, and as leaders, as members of a free and open society, in order to maintain that freedom, that way of life, that we should vote for democracy, not for those that would seek authoritarianism, not for those that would push us towards autocracy, certainly not those that would deny the results of free and fair elections. No, we need to do the right thing, and that is to vote for those who have democracy as their primary desire to serve. Not deconstructing our state, but enhancing the world we live in, the country we live in, the state we live in, our locale or municipality. Every one of these, in every person's name or every issue on the ballot in front of you in your particular location, is important. To learn, to think, to reflect. These are important things in this next week. But ultimately, getting out there and voting is critical. I call on each of you to lead, for each of you to do the right thing, and for each and every one of you to vote. Okay, short and simple message, but I think critically important in this time in our nation's history, in the events that are occurring in our localities and in our nation and certainly in our world. The United States needs to be a beacon for democracy, for free and fair open elections, and for our participation in that process, because in so doing, each of us leads. We must lead. Please do the right thing, everyone. Please get out there and vote. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate it. Have a great vote, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.